Hey, so good to be with you again. My name is Jeff Fuller, Jay Fuller Interviews on YouTube, the Facebook group, Instagram, and Twitter. And we are excited to have one of my favorites going back a long way to when I was young. And I guess she was too. Here is Jeff the OG, Leanor Till. Leanor, good to have you on.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. And so, Jeff, the girl from Five Iron Frenzy, I listened to an interview and you shared that story. You probably grow weary of sharing that nickname, but could you just do it one more time for our listeners? Where did you come up with Jeff the girl?
Yeah, so when I was 12, I was in a play, and the character's name was Jeff, and I was a tomboy. Can you believe that? And so the youth pastor said to everybody, call her Jeff. And everyone did, and it stuck.
Well, that's quite the name. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Jeff. I like that name, I guess.
Yeah.
Had to grow into it myself.
Right.
But I like how I'm a pastor, and sometimes I get talking so fast I don't make sense. And I mentioned once that it's good to be self-defecating, and I meant self-deprecating.
Yep.
Sometimes you talk about how Jesus loves the losers and how being part of ska and punk, it was just kind of those misfits. When did you kind of come into yourself, and when did you figure out like you didn't have to play that role, so to speak, anymore?
Right. So I became a punk rocker and a Christian around the same time, around 15, 16. And so I really loved punk music, but I learned right away that those lyrics were not very glorifying to the Lord. And so since I grew up in the countryside, I didn't have Christian music where I grew up. And so I would change the lyrics. So I would change old punk rock songs to talk about God and Christ. And then I met these weird guys through my cousin Micah, and these guys were in a Christian metal band called Exhumator. And I started going to their shows, and they taught me about Christian music. And they also taught me a lot about God, like started to disciple me and teach me more about the Bible and the real message. And so through the beginning years in Five Iron Frenzy, I was 18 when I joined, I really became discipled from being in the band, from the record label, from the pastors and the booking agents at the shows, and just by weekly Bible studies. And so started to grow into basically a Christian woman that understood that you are not a loser in Christ. Yeah. You are fully redeemed, you are fully loved, and you have a lot of credit when it comes to the Lord. But sometimes the world's not always going to see that when you have like blue hair and pink hair and nose piercings and tattoos, and what the world values and what Christ values is so different.
So, Leanor, I think I have, of course, I don't have it fitting, but you have a podcast. I'm going to share the screen now.
Yep.
As well. Too punk to be a hippie. And being here in Vermont, we have a lot where we affectionately call granolas, crunchies. That's Vermont culture now. Can you just share a little bit about what prompted you to start this podcast, and what have you learned so far with gardening and composting and growing pickles or whatever it is?
Right. So my mom, growing up in the countryside, she had a massive garden, huge, and she would spend every morning there. And I think it was like her time with God and to get away from kids. And so I always valued it, but I didn't know how to do it. And so I realized as I got older and lived in downtown Denver that there was something inside of me that cared about the earth, cared about connecting to God through nature and health, but really had nowhere to start. And so I thought, I'm not going to do this journey unless I have accountability. So making a podcast was like a built-in accountability. So if you say, I'm going to buy plants and learn about plants, or I'm going to make a garden, or I'm going to compost, if you say it to an audience, even if you don't know them, it makes you want to do it. And so that has helped. I have a garden going right now. And to be honest, I was just out there earlier, and the cucumbers finally have little flowers coming up. And you have no idea, like baby tomatoes, the joy that you feel when the food, after the first 2 months of watering, sometimes starting from seeds inside to planting it and hoping it makes it outside, to hailstorms and protecting it, to finally we might get something. Takes a long time.
So you are in Colorado. Can you just share a little bit about how you grew up, where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in northern Colorado, which is about an hour between Fort Collins and Cheyenne, Wyoming, kind of out there. And so my background is Mexican-American. My grandparents on both sides are Mexican-American. And so there is a different style culturally where dirt roads, chickens, bunch of kids running around, menudo, tamales. My mom was a migrant worker growing up, and a lot of poverty in my family, as well as not a lot of people graduating high school. I was the first one in my mom's family after my mom to graduate high school, first of all, and even go to college. So culturally, I grew up very different than my other band members in Five Iron Frenzy that were probably suburbanites. So yeah, my lifestyle was very different going from dirt road to Denver, Colorado to be in this punk band.
Now, were your parents musical? When did you find out that you were musical, that you enjoyed music?
Yeah, so my dad, his name is Art Ortega. Do you know who Cheech is? Cheech and Chong?
Yeah.
Okay, my dad talks like Cheech. I'm not exaggerating. He is Cheech with the mustache and everything, right? And so thick Spanish accent. And my mom was going to college, night school, when I was a little girl between 5 and 9. And so in the evenings, we had a music room. In our house, we had a whole room dedicated to jamming. And we had trumpets, saxophones, piano, a bunch of bongos and percussive instruments. And my dad would play vinyl, the old Motown mostly. And we would jam, just he and I, just rock out. And even like choreographed dance moves. And so this is where I learned to rock out to Motown. But also my dad liked gospel music, some Spanish gospel music, The Messengers, Andre Crouch, just really emotional music. And so honestly, like there'd be times where we would get emotional spiritually too. So it was a really formative time for me around music, God, my dad, culture.
That's pretty cool. I just smiled because my daughter a few years ago took up the euphonium. I had no idea what the euphonium was.
You have to remind me. I don't know.
So it's kind of like the baritone. She didn't want to do the flute or the saxophone like all of her friends, so she picked the largest instrument they offered. And behind this wall is where we live. This section here is like the church sanctuary area.
Right.
And so it's nice telling her, hey, you could go practice in the church side. Was that a labor of love learning to play the sax, or did it just come naturally?
I wasn't very good, to be honest. I didn't have a lot of resources growing up. So we had a little band in my tiny, tiny, tiny high school. It was so small, like about 300 kids. So I was the only tenor saxophone player and alto saxophone player. So when I joined Five Iron Frenzy after graduating, the band came up with a mission statement for our band. And one of the things on there was, we have to be musically good. And so I think it was their sneaky way of saying, Jeff, the band has decided out of the goodness of our heart and because of our mission statement that we are going to pay for your saxophone lessons, which I understood. And I pretended to be cool with it, and I was cool with it. Like, it just, to be honest, the other guys who went to bigger high schools and had marching band and jazz band and theory and all of these different resources, I was way behind. I was probably playing at a 6th grade level.
So let's jump forward, then we'll jump back. Five Iron Frenzy, on your knuckles is written, we're back. Could you just talk about what caused you guys to return, and how exciting is it now in this stage of life just to be a part of Five Iron Frenzy? Right.
So just a little bit of history. When I was 18, I joined Five Iron Frenzy, and then I was in that band till 2003. And when we decided to break up, it was under good terms. It's probably one of the only bands that I know that had a spiritual retreat with a pastor, talked about our lives. People were getting married. People were in serious relationships. We had been in the band a long time, wanted to do something else. So on good terms, we decided to do a final tour and a final album. And it was heartbreaking because, the last year we were putting out all these good songs. We were playing as perfectly as we could have. Like that last show at the Fillmore in Denver, Colorado was probably the epic show we've ever played, the tightest. And anyway, so then we broke up for maybe 8 or 9 years. We were broken up. Everybody got married in the band to different people, obviously. And I had 2 kids. And we were just finding different careers, finding different jobs. Some people had moved away from Denver, and most of us had not been very much in touch. And then there was some rumors that Five Iron Frenzy might get back together. The rumors started at Cornerstone Festival. Yeah. And it was kind of my fault because I had said to somebody, it would be amazing and they misquoted me in a blog and said, Five Iron Frenzy commits to coming back. And then I had all these phone calls, and all the guys in the band that I hadn't even heard of in a long time were saying, what did you say? What did you do? And then Reese said, we should all have a phone call. And I thought, to say hello.
Yeah.
And we all had a phone call, and Reese said, I would love to get back together. And Scott, who hadn't been in the band in a long time, said, I've been writing songs, and I would love to hear you guys on them. And my heart about stopped, and I think Micah and I were like, don't joke around about this, Scott. It's not funny. It's like our whole life. We love it. We love it. So we got back together in 2011.
So it makes me kind of laugh because now you're in charge of all the interviews and some of the marketing. So what if you misspeak again? What are you going to get the band into? It's one of those.
I do misspeak. We all do. There's 8 of us. You can't control us. There's no censoring us.
And so with 8 people in the band, you're the only female, especially when you're 18, first starting out. Was it just like being with older brothers? How close were you to the other band members? And talk about being on the road. Like, how did fights get resolved over those years?
Okay, so all the guys treat me differently. So Micah, he's my cousin. Our grandpas are brothers. And so he's almost like a brother. We would share hotel rooms. We kind of have a lot in common culturally. Andy, our drummer, is definitely a hot-tempered Italian, and it's awesome because he will make sure that I'm protected, that I'm safe. He's kind of always aware of where I am. And then the other guys are kind of like my best friends. Like, there are fights. There are definitely fights. Fights will usually happen when someone feels sensitive about something and they want it their way at the expense of everybody else, and it just happens. And so there are some people where you have to avoid them for a couple months maybe and just wait for them to experience that you love them because you've been kind. And then there's other people where you have to have a face-to-face, this hurt me and you suck. And what I like about guys, I mean, men and women are somewhat different. And one thing about men that I've learned is they will just say it and then they'll just forgive you and you just walk on and it doesn't come up again. And there's not this weird, I like that. Where it's like, you hurt me, I'm sorry, the end. So that's been nice.
Let's get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of writing music. And I heard a podcast recently where you just shared how anybody could bring a song or lyrics together. First of all, your inspiration for writing songs, is that from what you read, what you're learning? Is it just super spiritual and the Holy Spirit tells you what to write? What is your process as far as putting a song together?
There's been a couple different processes. In the beginning, it was just poems. And then if Reese can't come up with lyrics, I would take one of my poems and kind of adapt it. But honestly, the Holy Spirit has helped, I would say. There's been times with the song Something Like Laughter. I wrote the lyrics and melody to that. And I wrote the lyrics and melody to All That Is Good. And that song began as a poem kind of talking about, one of the lines is, do all streams lead to one sea? And for any young Christian, as you've been a Christian for a while, you morph. Your spirituality, I like to say faith is fluid. Yeah. It never stands still. And so things that I said that I believed in my 20s, you get to your 30s and you're like, wow, I've learned a lot. I'm changing a lot. I'm growing a lot. My identity with Christ is growing. And so you have to adapt, but that doesn't mean that you're like losing all of it, right? You're not just dismissing everything. And so some of those lyrics, the Holy Spirit has really helped me because I feel with Five Iron that it's too big to be a coincidence. Obviously, God is glorified and is using this. And so I don't want to just waste my opportunity to encourage somebody. So it's been interesting knowing that we have a big audience and knowing that our lyrics matter.
And that's really good. And I have a confession. And my friend, my friend said, oh, you want to have Leanor on because you used to have a crush on her. And I said, no, that's not my confession. Now, the confession is I am not musical and I grew up playing sports. And so I would thought hip hop, rap was what I was supposed to listen to. Then when I went to Bible college and then I was introduced to you guys and I was like, whoa, this music is fun. It's different than that hip hop, than that rap. And something about just ska with the horns. Just describe it a little bit, because for me, it was just so new and different. I was like, oh, this is something I could latch on to. But just talk about the style of music that you've been involved with.
Yeah, and I didn't grow up with a lot of ska either. When I was about 15, I saw Skank and Pickle at a local club, and I was like, what is this? People are spazzing out. There's horns. There's loudness. It's like Chicago or Motown with some of those horns, like Tower of Power, but with punk.
Yeah.
And I loved it because I already played saxophone, and because my dad had grown me up with, little beats in the Tower of Power and like funk, But this added the punk beat, and I was so into it. And so one of the things that I did a couple years ago, and you could look into, is called Pick It Up. I was one of the producers on a ska documentary.
Sure.
And that describes in detail how ska started in Jamaica, when the Jamaican people were trying to mimic Motown, but made it their own and had their own spice to it and their own upbeats, the accent on the upbeats. And then how it traveled from Jamaica to two-tone ska, went to, and then you had Madness and the Specials, and basically all the mixed race bands that are not racist, but they call themselves skinheads. And they also are talking about working class, fun party music. And then, of course, the punk rockers in the States get a hold of this music, and then you have East Coast ska, West Coast ska, third wave ska, American ska is just all over the place. And that is what Five Iron decided to play, because we thought it was very joyful. And when Five Iron Frenzy first began as a heavy metal band with Exhumator, the guys in the band were like, you know what? We're not angsty. We're not angry. We have the love of Christ, and we're sick of grunge, and we're sick of metal. So that's why we went with ska.
That's really cool. Hey, so please tell that story. I referred to it on Facebook, I think it was, about you had a professor that kind of prayed for something to happen. Just talk about how you got that tenor saxophone.
Yeah, so like I said, I had a music room with my dad, and he had bought me a pawn shop saxophone. So my alto saxophone came from the pawn shop. It was not very good, and I joined Five Iron, and we were playing shows. And they said, because we had a trombone and a trumpet, we really want you to play tenor. And so you have to get a tenor. And I'm thinking, I'm really poor. I live in the dorm. I eat ramen. How am I going to get a $2,000 tenor saxophone? And so I was going to Colorado Christian University at the time in Denver. And I brought it up in class. Like I had, a blue mohawk back then. I definitely stood out. And so I, said to our professor, I don't remember what class he taught. And I said, can we please put on the board for the prayer request that I get another job? So I was already working at Baskin Robbins ice cream. I need another job so I can save up to get a tenor saxophone. And he wrote and he prayed, Lord, we just ask that you miraculously give Jeff a saxophone. And I was mad. I really was mad, because I thought, now it's too much. You asked God for too much. He's not going to do it. Well, this is one of those stories where I went home that night to my dorm, and my dad called me, and he said, I know you aren't playing tenor and you've never really played one, but your uncle, who plays at a church in Los Angeles, is sending you a tenor because this horn is too loud for him, for his worship service. Too loud. And so it's being shipped here.
So right? Yeah, it's pretty phenomenal, and it's a lot of fun. So I do want to know, why didn't you ask the professor to pray for more things after that? Do you think he had a straight connection to God, or what was it?
No, probably because I was just blown away. That was probably good enough, getting that horn. And then, can I just go on with the story?
Yeah.
So here's the other part. So then, like I said, 9 years happened between Five Iron Frenzy breaking up and getting back together. Well, so I had put away my horns. I hadn't played. I'd been pregnant. I'd had kids. I was working at Scum of the Earth Church doing ministry. I ran into my uncle from Los Angeles. He was visiting, and we're just chatting. And at this point, I know Five Iron Frenzy is getting back together, but he doesn't know. And I can't tell my dad because he can't keep a secret to save his life. So we've already been writing new songs and recording. And I'm going into the studio soon. And I mentioned this to my Uncle Zeke, and I said, and he's Christian too. And I said, actually, I didn't mention it. We're just talking. He pulls out of his pocket a mouthpiece. This is the same thing. And he said, I brought this from Los Angeles because it's too loud when I play at church. Wow. Do you have a use for it? It's a $300 mouthpiece. And that's the one I recorded Engine of a Million Plots with, our album, when we got back together. And he didn't even know we were getting back together.
It's awesome. And I just want you to share a little bit too, because when you said you first started the band, or when we're young, a lot of times what we think Jesus is about is just how we grew up and what we learned. But as we grow up even further and we understand God's grace and how immense He is, it kind of takes deeper root in a different, maybe less legalistic fashion.
Right.
You guys, I feel, have done a tremendous job. This is why I really enjoy Five Iron, is that you do a great job connecting people with the truth of Jesus, but also in a less preachy way. I don't know how to put that, but why do you do that so intentionally? Does it come naturally? Is there debate amongst band members about how bold to be? Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it does come naturally because we were band geeks. A lot of the guys in our band were raised by single mothers. That's part of their story, from coming from divorced backgrounds. We didn't have a lot of clout. We were spiritual and loved Jesus, but we weren't taken seriously because of the tattoos, because we were over the top. And we kind of always were too Christian for the secular scene and too secular for the Christian scene. Like, we went on Warped Tour. We went on Ska Gets Racism. We would open up for all these bands like Less Than Jake and the Pie Tasters and Cherry Poppin' Daddies and all these bands that would just make my mom, like, her eyeballs roll out of her head. And I'm like, this is what we need to be doing. We need to be in the culture and with the culture and understanding the culture, not because we're not part of it, because part of us are. We are just punk kids. We are just learning this along with everybody else. And so we never felt like it was absolutely the mission field. It felt like, these are concerts, these are shows, these are kids, And then the same for Christian. You could be playing with Switchfoot. You could be playing a massive Christian festival like Creation. And of course, they put us on the Fringe stage, which I don't mind. And Acquire the Fire, it's like, oh man, this is like, we're right on the line here. But all the kids smoking outside are going to come in to see Five Iron Frenzy. And so I know we were like the token, the token Fringe stage band. But our message is definitely that Christ loves all of us. Whether you are the prep or the loser or the stoner or the burnout or the atheist, it doesn't really matter.
So that's a fact. And I think that it's definitely timely that you guys are back. But could you just share about how important is it that Christians engage in conversations that make us uncomfortable? If not today, there's never been a day where it's so important that we get out of our castles and into the streets.
Well, that's part of the problem. Is I learned when I was going to church, which I still go to church. I think going to church is good, but sometimes you go to church and then you join a small group and then your friends are in church and then you're in a mom's group, and pretty soon all your world, 90% of your world, is the event, the volunteer, the service, the church, the kids, and then your nuclear family, and suddenly there's no room for God or outreach. Right. And if all your friends are Christians, and if all you do 90% of your time is hang out with people who agree with you, then how are you offering fruit and light? If you don't know your neighbors, if you aren't serving in secular organizations and, getting to know different people, if you don't find some hobbies and some interests that are outside of church doors. And in fact, I struggle with a lot of times pastors in general, pastors and staff of church, they're the ones that don't have any time built into their schedule to make that time to have friends. They should be playing volleyball or picnicking or having groups or just non-quote unquote spiritual time, even in their job, so that they can, you don't want to just say outreach, but so that they can impact the culture.
I definitely agree. And you could probably ask people within our congregation. I probably spend too much time, but I think that's where we're supposed to be. But this is kind of a pointed question, maybe, I don't know. But with your two children, how old are they? And where's that healthy rhythm of protecting them, but also really encouraging them to be the church, not just go to church?
Right. So my son just turned 14 and my daughter is 12. And they were raised going to a church called Scum of the Earth Church. And that is fascinating because it's not your typical church. It was created out of the Five Iron Frenzy Bible study after shows. And so it started in a coffee shop, then a carpet warehouse, then an old Safeway grocery store. So eventually it did get a church. But in fact, right now there's a skate ramp in the church, like a half pipe. Yeah. And there's a slide in the sanctuary in case kids get bored. So they didn't grow up in typical church. The good about that is that they understand that homeless people are still Mr. and Mrs., that you respect homeless people, but you also have to have an understanding of safety. At the church, at the physical church, all the kids there know you don't run around. It's not the kind of church where kids just can go unsupervised, right? They understand when they see somebody on the street, don't call the cops, call detox. My kids got that at a young age. They understand that there are gutter punks that could live in vehicles or dumpster dive. And they understand that you don't have to keep up with the Joneses to be a good person.
Definitely.
So if anything, I have had to work harder to try and make them feel comfortable in a suburban church where they're looking at me going, Mom, this is cheesy. Or you don't have a beautiful, crusty piece of bread for communion that you just dump into some juice. They're going, this little piece in this little cup, and they're like, Mom, this isn't communion like this. Nobody, what? Where's the bread? They used to be small. They dig out, all the cushy bread as the kids. But I want them to know that suburbanite Christianity is Christianity too. We are not better than because we do it one way. There's so many different aspects of Christianity. And so as they get older, one of the things I want to teach them too is broaden their horizon by trying different cultural experiences in church.
So I say this very carefully. Someone just stated that Black Lives Matter does not mean that Black lives are better, which I agree with.
Yeah.
I do look at the current situation our country is in, and not just for you with your Mexican-American background, but also with being female, and just the Me Too movement was huge, revealing different things that took place that were hidden and covered up. Did you find any of that when you were on the road, whether it was other bands, fans, where they would cross that line, especially with you being the female in that 8-person band?
Yeah, unfortunately, I need to at all times be completely aware of where I am, whom I'm around. There's been times where the guys go out at night and there will be people in the crowd that make me uncomfortable, and I'll say, I'm not going, or I need to just be aware. Another thing about our voice as far as women go, like there are times where I want to be part of the songwriting process and other people will just take over.
Yeah.
And it's hard because I want to assert myself, but I also, it's not that I don't think you can write a good part. I know you can, but would you allow me to also use my voice? It's a different voice. And there was one punk rock band, a Christian punk rock band called Jump Ship Quick. And it was these beefy Canadian Christians, and they love the Lord. And I don't know why, but they asked me to produce their album. And I looked at their lyrics and I thought, these are a lot of heavy-handed lyrics. And I said, it's good to say, we don't like this about the world. We don't like this about Christianity. We don't like these pastors all about money. We don't like Hollywood. We don't like Insane Clown Posse. Fine, we get it. I started to change the lyrics with their permission and said, how can we also look inward? How can we also look at the dialogue so that it's just not blasting people? Because Christ didn't come at it just that way. He had a balance, right? And so they were so funny because in the beginning they were like, but we don't want our lyrics to be feminine. I said, it's not feminine. It's not feminine to say the meek will inherit the earth. It's not feminine to say I need to grow. It's not feminine to admit fault. And so it's been fascinating through the conversation of Me Too to say what aspects of quote unquote femininity and masculinity are really just true for all people and they're going to improve our mental health as a nation.
No, it's so true. And I really enjoy Brene Brown, and she talks a lot about vulnerability, but with vulnerability needs to come accountability so we can grow and we aren't just stuck in one place. When I first listened to you guys for the first time, it was a Cornerstone Festival around 99 maybe, but you were recording a live album. And Reese shared from the stage that he had just gone through a devastating breakup. And I actually snuck on the bus a couple days later and talked to him. And he was just so engaging with just being heartbroken and just really searching for God in that moment. Can you talk about how, characters born out of adversity, how have you experienced that? How is the band? And it seems to come out in a lot of your music.
Right. So one of the heavier albums, lyrically and musically, that we wrote is called 5 Iron Frenzy 2 Electric Boogaloo, which is a ridiculous name, but that's the way we do it. You kind of salt and pepper the heavy with the light. And that album was after Reese had gone through a terrible heartbreak and after my brother had passed away, after Columbine. I mean, these are very heavy, heavy moments for our whole band because they knew my brother. And then when Columbine happened, we were at Gospel Music Awards in GMA in Nashville, and we were actually in a hotel room watching the news because Micah's sister was at the school hiding out.
Wow.
And so we were watching that live. So I think that the music has been one of the gifts God has given us to grow, like a way to say, I've experienced this and I still love Jesus, even though I have questions, even though I have doubts, even though I have anger. And now that I'm 43, Jeff, the audacity is that I can say about God and about life, I don't like this.
Yeah.
There was a long time where I thought saying, I don't like this or I don't understand was sinful. And now I can say, God, you are good, but I don't like this. Right. I don't get it, and I need help. And so part of the faith being fluid aspect is understanding the balance between becoming a Pharisee that is like, I've got it all together,
right, and
becoming just jaded and saying, I don't have anything together. There's a sweet spot in the middle that says, there's a lot I don't know, but I know God is good. And so we're just going to go with that.
Yeah, and for me, the pendulum swings one extreme to the other. I need to settle a little bit more into the balance. When Five Iron Frenzy, when you guys were at your peak, or maybe you're at your peak now, just talk to me about how you had to remain humble, but how challenging was it just to go in somewhere and people knew who you were? They wanted your autographs, pictures, all of that. Just share about the maturity that needed to take place during those times and how you grew.
I knew that we had crossed a line in popularity when it was Halloween and there were young girls that were me. I was like, what? You're wearing army fatigues and Doc Martens and you have dye in your hair and spikes and who are you? And they're like, you, Jeff the girl. And I was like, this is weird. And I actually started to cry because I went to the school bus, which is what you had been on, what we traveled in. And I called my mom and I said, I don't want people to be me. I don't want them to emulate me. I don't want them to look up to me because I'm not worthy of that. And I also was bummed because I was like, I just want to be an arrow for Jesus. Yeah. And if they see me, they're missing the point. And so it's been hard because honestly, when people put you on a pedestal, you start to act like you deserve to be on a pedestal. Yeah. And then when I would go home from tours where towels and showers are brought, you have this nice hotel just for a shower. You're not even going to stay there. Then you get in the bus and travel. You're in a tour bus, like not even the school bus, a nice tour bus, good meals, you're making money, you're a rock star. I would go home and just kind of get into a depression because I wanted the world to just cater to me. And all my friends would say, you're kind of being a jerk.
So share a little bit about when you got married. What was that relationship like? Was it nice to have somebody that knew you as just Leanor, or was that a hard process just to share in?
Yeah, I didn't think that I would get married when I was in Five Iron. I had dated a few people, but it takes a really strong person to trust me and be cool with me traveling a lot and to not always come, but also be cool with coming. And also I was drawn to Stephen because his personality was very relaxed. He was a missionary kid. He grew up in Greece. He moved to the States when he was 14. And so what we had in common is we didn't identify with, I don't know, I guess you could say suburbia. Me being Mexican-American, he was drawn to that because he understood the Greek Mediterranean culture. Sure. He liked all the big crowds of people, the food, the loud, the affectionate. And so it was interesting getting to know him. And I think part of the reason that our romance developed is because my brother had passed away, and my brother had always been that quiet, soft-spoken, loving, peaceful person. And then when I was around Stephen, my friend, I felt that calm because I'm pretty hyper. And so it took a couple years before I was like, oh, wow, there's more here.
That's so good. Share a little bit more about when your brother passed away. How did your faith grow in that crisis, and did it really flounder at that time?
It did not flounder, and that was because I was given a gift. And I had gone to church the first time after my brother had passed away. He had died in a car accident. He was 20, I was 24. and he was driving really fast down the mountains. And it was devastating. And I remember going to church and thinking and praying basically out loud and saying, God, I don't want to hate you, but I feel like I'm at a crossroads.
Yeah.
This is where I go angry, or this is where I go soft. And I truly felt like God was hugging me and saying to me, well, Jesus, saying, I didn't do this to you. I am mourning with you. And I said, good, because I didn't want to hate you. And it was one of those moments where I was like, that was like a gift, like one of those moments. And then the other thing that happened after that was I decided to live life really, really, really well for the two of us, for me and my brother. So, for instance, if there's an ocean, I don't care if I have clothes on, I would jump in. Or if there's a roller coaster, whatever it is, like sometimes people feel like, oh, should I do this? Should I not? Yeah. I'm going to do it. Because life is short. And so that passing of my brother, obviously very sad, but in a weird way, it opened up my doors to say, God, use me however, because I know he's good. I know my brother's name is Carlos. I know he's good. Now, let's just focus on living this life so that I can get back there.
That's a great perspective. Who are the mentors in your life? Was it your parents? Was it a teacher? Who really kind of helped you develop this strong foundation that, well, so many kids, so many people really seem not to have right now?
So one of the main mentors in my life was and is a woman named Amy Croft. And she's just this lady that lives down the street from me. She lives a pretty basic life. She has a horse, which is cool. But she always says things that just challenge me. And so for the past 20 years, she's been my mentor. She started being my mentor when I was in a relationship with Stephen, and she was going to kind of help me with my relationship. But I learned that her wisdom in the Lord is so different than the way I think about life. So certain things, as far as when you have kids, she would say, this is the hardest time of your life. And I'd be like, oh, yeah. And she'd be like, don't watch HGTV. Don't read house magazines that make you want to have everything in order. That is not what the Lord has for you this season. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Or like simple things like, don't nag at your husband all day long because that's not going to work. You know, and not only that, but also health and beauty. Like back when I first got married, she said, leave a line item in your budget for looking good and feeling good about yourself. Things like this that you would never really think, like when women let themselves go, it's like, there's no money for me. It's like, oh no, there's money for me.
So that's a huge, big question. And my daughter is 16. She's going into her junior year of high school. And so just that whole identity, she's beautiful. I say she's beautiful, but she doesn't have a boyfriend. So sometimes she's like, Dad, that's just you saying that I'm beautiful. It's like, no, you are. You don't need a boyfriend right now. You're only 16. Yeah. How can we as dads reinforce beauty with our daughters or with our spouses?
I think there is something to words. I will say that. I also had a pastor, and it may feel uncomfortable because I was a tomboy, but let's say for a wedding I dressed up or got my hair dyed, he wouldn't go on and on and on, but he would say, your hair looks pretty. As men, it is okay. We've gone so far to the other side that we pretty much don't acknowledge a person's physicality at all. Yeah. And that's also doing an injustice. And Reese Roper will say that when I get my hair dyed or when I do something, he'll say, you look so pretty. And I know it's just a little comment, but it'll puff me up all day and make me feel good. And I don't think it's inappropriate. I think it's wonderful that he can say that for me.
So Leanor, we'll get you out in a couple questions. Thank you so much for making the time and adjusting to the time difference. This is the longest Instagram handle I think I've ever seen. But,
it's all my name. That's all my name.
People can check it out there. And of course, they can check out your website and your podcast, toopunktobeahippie.com. So what do you like to do for fun? Do you just grab the saxophone? Is that still relaxing for you? Or is that another job?
No. For fun, I've gotten into food. I'm really sad right now that we can't go to restaurants, but eventually we will again. We are getting sometimes pickup, but I like different ethnic food. And so Brazilian food, Ethiopian food, sushi. Like I said, I grew up in the country, so I didn't have Thai food and all these. I mean, we had Mexican food. It was Mexican food or trying our hand at meatloaf or something like that. But food, different cultural food is like, to me, that is so fun, and it's worth the money, and it's exciting, and it's interesting. Different flavors are very exciting to me.
Now, my mom does not typically watch these interviews. She'll watch the church ones, but not these. So I'll ask this question.
Yeah.
Craft beer gets to be a huge thing, especially here in Vermont. Hill Farmstead, #1 brewery in the world for the last, 5 years, 6 out
Wow.
of 7 years, something like that. Colorado, of course, brewers. Are you more of a craft brew lady, or do you just like your wine? Or what is your drink of choice on these hot summer afternoons?
Well,
Evenings?
if I'm being really Latina, which is high maintenance, I would want a Corona in a glass with salt and a lime. So, but I do love craft. Like, we have a lot of good beer here, and I didn't know that I liked beer until I tried sours and pale ales. And Left Handed Brewery has a chai beer, so the mixture, a nice milk stout. All these different things are super interesting to me now because, again, talking about flavor, you just try a Coors or a Budweiser with your uncle at a barbecue. That's not beer. But then when you try different things out, you're like, wow, there's so many different pumpkin beer, jalapeno beer. There's interesting things.
Yeah, we use a lot of maple. So a lot of maple stouts, a lot of maple infused.
It's delicious.
So pretty crazy, pretty crazy. Besides what you like to do for fun, what is a hobby that you and your husband enjoy together?
Well, mostly food we do like, but also hiking. Hiking in Colorado, you can't take it for granted. It's so beautiful. There are so many different red rocks jutting out, different trails. There's the plains here in Colorado. There's tundra here. There's woods here. There's lakes. There's glacier lakes. So mostly just hiking and exploring. And now that the kids are older, they can hike for a few miles too. So that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And I lived in Pagosa Springs for a couple years,
Oh,
down by Durango, and it's definitely beautiful. Wolf Creek Pass, all of that. So I also saw you guys play in Boston. What was a favorite venue that you had in the United States that you just remember fondly?
Well, one of them was, I think it was called the Paradise in Boston. I don't know if you ever went to that one, but it had like a vibe of like 1940s. And so all the pictures had women, beautiful black and white actresses. And then it had like fish tanks all over and like leopard print couches and just beautiful. And I always said I wanted a birthday party there, but I don't think they have it anymore.
Now, for you in the artistic side, is that something that I'm just sports. Sports is like the big thing. I do enjoy some music, but when you try to blend and you want your kids and people just to be well-rounded, how important is it that we lift up the arts and we get students involved in multiple events so they can know? Yeah,
I think sports are very important for group, but I think what music can offer you is a chance to connect with God in a new way.
Yeah.
If you know piano, if you know guitar, you can lead at worship, but you can also have a moment to yourself to reflect and be creative. And there's also something said for not doing something well, for trying something. Like even you, Jeff, you could try something, an instrument, or painting or embroidery, who knows what, and just try something tactile. I also think that the bummer about the arts is they're often thought of as feminine. Yeah. And so I think like when it comes to piano, it's not a woman's instrument, but men could be like, wow, I don't want to play that. But my son, he's 14 and he's learning how to play piano, but also drums and also bass, But I think it is important that you learn an instrument just so that you have that, I don't know, it's a good way to get out energy and it's a good way to get that right brain going.
Yeah, I tried to cheat the system. I took piano, I think my senior year of college, and I just memorized everything, and I did not learn how to read music. So I kind of cheated the system. But I think I heard an interesting thing that there's several within 5-iron that do not read music. Does that make for more fun or more difficulty?
No, it doesn't really. The only bummer about that is that we have people that say, can you give me the sheet music to this song? And we're like, no, doesn't exist. Like, I don't, just figure it out.
And then also for you, I heard you say that you are not a soloist, that you get more nervous about solos. What is it about that? Is it because you're unsure of yourself or you don't want the spotlight on you?
No, it's kind of what you said. Like, I didn't study music enough to understand the musicality. There's mathematics to it. There are scales. There's certain notes that fit into certain scales, and I don't know them. I don't have them memorized. Yeah. And so if someone were to say this is A scale, I would say, cool.
Hey, so Leanor Ortega Till, thank you so much for making the time. I just want to bring up once more your podcast and the website, Too Punk to Be a Hippie. What is something right now that you are working on learning? And before you answer that, Vermont, we just went to no plastic bags at grocery stores. You actually have to bring your own reusable bag. And July 1st, no food scraps are allowed in the trash. Everybody in Vermont has to compost now, which is causing some discomfort. We actually have a bear that probably 3 feet to my right has hit our house multiple times this last week. What is something that is exciting for you to learn about with taking care of this creation that God's given us?
I think that's awesome about the bags, because that's one of those things is you can bring your bags in. Like in Germany, they've been doing that for decades. You just take a box or a bag, a foldable box, you keep in your trunk, and then it's plastic and it folds flat. And then when you go into the grocery store, you just unfold it and you have it in your cart. That's easier than even bags. But we don't do it because we're not expected to. And if
we're lazy.
If we expect the least amount out of each other, but what I want to learn about is kombucha making.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, it's delicious. And so I have a friend, and I think it's called a SCOBY. It looks like a nasty mushroom.
Oh, yeah.
And I drink kombucha, but I have not made it. And so that's going to be a process, because like I'm saying, these are things that I want to do, but it doesn't just come easy. There's trial and error, and it's not expensive, but it's going to take time.
On Shark Tank, there was a kombucha package that sold, and now it's on Amazon. And so I'd recommend that. It's pretty good. I mean,
okay, cool.
Done it, so makes it simple.
Thank you.
Hey, Leanor, thank you so much. Final question, 5-Iron Frenzy. Are you guys planning anything of note during this pandemic time? What are the plans for the fall, winter touring? How can people access your music during this time of just being at home?
Right now, we are not touring or playing any shows, but I will say that the current climate in our nation, like kind of what you said about Black Lives Matter, about the subjects that we care about immigration, about health, so many things, the Me Too movement, we are learning and we are growing and we are writing songs. And so there will be more from us. And there's so much more to say. And not only that, but just the idea that we don't have to fear our neighbor. God doesn't want us to fear or hate our neighbor. Right. And hate starts with fear. Yes, and so, and fear starts without engaging. And so even if you don't like 5-Iron, check it out. Don't fear us because we have a strong message. Check it out. See what you think. And even if you disagree, at least maybe it'll inform you of what you don't agree with.
Definitely. I love the music. It's a lot of fun. And just thank you so much for making the time. Pleasure having you on.
Yeah, it was awesome to talk. Thanks, Jeff.
And again, that's Leanor Ortega Till from 5-Iron Frenzy. Jeff the Girl, you can check her podcast out and check out 5ironfrenzy.com. We'll be back, and trust you guys are doing well. Thanks again.